So masculinity sucks. We're gonna go back to this topic from last time. So hey everyone, Wanderbot here, and welcome back to the Cookie Cast. So if you caught the last episode, I was trying very hard to talk about masculinity, but I couldn't get past the not going to say the insurmountable wall of sports, but I feel like sports and masculinity are intrinsically tied in a way that I feel like disentangling those would be very healthy for society. But then even beyond that it's kind of this like bad self-feeding cycle that sports are masculinity and masculinity are sports. And until you can properly extricate those two from each other, they're always going to just continuously have this negative feedback loop that holds us back. And so now that I've kind of talked a little bit about why sports bothers me so much, for a lot of different reasons, plus a couple of, little short stories as part of that. Oh, what is the phrase for it? I forget. Doesn't matter. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about masculinity and why that also kind of bothers me. I'm not going to say I'm a particularly girly man guy. I probably fall best into kind of the art nerd category or gamer nerd, but like not quite. Because there's so many tropes that I think so many people ascribe to one group or another, and it's often very difficult to extricate what is the culture and what is just kind of this weird residual. I'm going to use the word toxic masculinity a couple of times, and the meaning is going to change a lot because I think it's a good umbrella term for just talking about it in general, but a bad umbrella term when you want to talk about specifics because so many people just roll their eyes at the idea of toxic masculinity. But I think it's a good way of describing it. So I think we might as well actually try and define that a little bit. I probably should have done better with my notes on that. But I feel like toxic masculinity is several components. For starters, and I'd say probably most damaging, is that toxic masculinity believes that winning is more important than anything else. You have to always be... You don't have to be right. You have to win the argument. You don't have to play fair. You have to win. You don't have to be kind. You have to come out on top. Or maybe not be kind. You don't have to have a fun or fair competition for everybody. You have to be, the victor. And there's more. There's so much more. I think this is just going to be tied into everything. Emotions are weakness. And weakness should be avoided at all costs. I feel like that's kind of one of those lasting issues that very much gets associated with masculinity. And it bothers me because it often is just kind of this, ooh, cookies are twice as often and last twice as long. Yeah, let's go for that. The cookies are definitely the moneymaker. I mean, I think everything is kind of the moneymaker, but having the cookies pop up, be like, here's a shit ton of money. Yeah, that does the trick. Anyway. But so I feel like so many of these things are kind of this self-feeling, self-perpetuating cycle. And I think that also goes along with that whole toxic masculinity. So many of these are. I'm just gonna say right now, like almost all of these are just various traits that can be ascribed to toxic masculinity. And extricating and recognizing these as problems, I think, is kind of important because for so many of these issues, emotions being a weakness that you have to win, not play fair, be right, honest, so on and so forth. It is seen as a virtue to be a dick because enough people have associated being this like manly asshole as somehow this morally righteous and admirable position to be in. And that bugs the hell out of me. Shell and I were talking about Blade Runner the other day, and that it had popped up on Netflix, and she's like, do you want to see Blade Runner at some point? I'm like, honestly, no. The more I go back and watch Harrison Ford movies from like back in the day, there's still some good ones. But like going back to watch Indiana Jones, dude is really shitty towards the women around him. And they fawn over him for it. He is absolutely just dismissive and unkind and relatively inconsiderate to the every single female lead in every single one of the movies. You know, okay, maybe not so much so with the German woman in the third movie. That was very, I'd almost say that was a little bit more balanced, just because she was evil and ultimately backstabbed him. But even then, at the end, it definitely felt odd, but it wasn't quite the same level of just like predatory, somewhat chauvinistic behavior towards the women around him. In the first movie, effectively, the main female character is a fairly competent one, but effectively Harrison Ford just kind of leaves her in the femme fatale role or the damsel in distress role and doesn't really... I mean, I think a lot of it was also the script, but the Indiana was just very much like, you know, no, I'm not going to work with you. No, I have no interest in working with you, even though you might actually be a totally tough and competent character. And of course, the script did not give her the chance to shine in that manner either, which kind of sucked. Because I think it could have been really interesting to actually have, you know, a counterpart that right off the bat was as competent, if not more so, than Harrison Ford. That, you know, his only defining features that made him better, question mark, would be luck. But even then, I don't know. But same thing in the second movie, you know, he spends half the time just kind of deriding this woman that he's stuck with, and then yelling at her, and then rescuing her. And she's just, I mean, realistically, she was Steven Spielberg's girlfriend at the time. So, straight up, she was just Mary suing in to be in a cool movie. But it created this, like, weird, gross feeling of Harrison Ford just being awful to every female counterpart in almost every movie that he was in. I mean, even Han Solo was distinctly, you know, very dismissive and very unfriendly towards Leia. And then when their romance started, it was very predatory and kind of creepish, the way he approached her. And I feel like it creates this perception that this sort of behavior is not only acceptable, but admirable. That specific approach to romance is sexy. And should be emulated by people. And I'm frustrated by that. Because so many of our problems really do stem from taking what I would call, taking aspects of relatively toxic masculine traits and treating them as kind of exemplary. That, you know, it is good to be the sports people. I mean, take a look at... okay, there was a lot of media back in the 70s and 80s that were like, hey, but what if, you know, what if the jocks aren't actually cool and it's the underdogs that always win? You know, you often would see a lot of stuff like that. But realistically, within most school settings, it was still the top dog sports people as the popular ones. The kids that everybody looks up to and wants to be like. They're the attractive ones. They're the ones that get the girl. They're the ones that have the nice cars. They're the ones that dress well. They're the ones that actually get to do the fun things. And all of the social outcasts, nerds, the people that care, the people that are, you know, more emotional or whatever, they usually get dunked on and treated poorly. And obviously, yeah, you do see a lot of media that does kind of lionize those underdogs and kind of show them to be just as viable. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that most of these sports guys don't end up actually going into, they don't... Ooh, hi. Ooh. Do I want banks are twice as efficient? No. This is going to get me more and boost everything. But yeah, you don't actually see a lot of these, like, really big sports guys, you know, the top football player, the top soccer player. You don't see these people going off to actually work in the movie industry most of the time. Maybe as an actor, but rarely as the writers, rarely as the directors. Frankly, it's usually the nerdy people that end up in those roles because they're the ones that put in the time and the effort to, you know... Ooh. That's... Oh my god. Alright, I'm just gonna let this go. It'd be lovely to do something else, anything else, but that's 600 billion right then and there. 77 times my regular amount of cookies. Cripes. Well, shipments being twice as effective seems like it would be worth it. Same thing with the, oh, I could get both of them. There we go. Alright, so now we're at 65 million cookies. That's pretty good. So the wizard towers are still very much worthwhile. I think the shipments aren't quite worth it. Temples dropped off. Damn. It's fine. What do I invest in? The problem is everything is so expansive. Just so expansive. How much is each one of these? 38.5% of total CPS. So each shipment is a 2% increase, give or take. I don't know. I don't know how to balance that a little bit. But that, I mean, what else do I even have on my list? Vulnerability is a weakness. Beer, burgers, and manual labor. That's actually a separate thing. For masculinity, that it really bothers me. I was thinking about this recently. I've seen a number of my peers, you know, nerdy people that have been on social media and internet that are turning 30 and 40. And so you see a lot of streamers that are like, hey, you know, are there any streamers that are older than 30, older than 40? You know, how many of you guys have families or a real job or, you know, have been at this for longer than 10 years or something like that? And I've been seeing it more often, and you see a number of people that are kind of saying, hey, turning 30 isn't the end of the world. You know, turning 30 does not mean your life is over. Everybody always seems to act like your teens and your 20s are the best years of your life, and then everything else after that is kind of downhill. I think a lot of that is mostly just because you spend, you know, your teens and your 20s having a lot of fun, learning, improving, getting into a good career, settling into your life, being able to enjoy it for a while. And then kids come along, and then everything is a little bit more focused on kids. And then by the time the kids are gone, you're old and gray and can't do as many fun things anymore, which, I mean, is valid, but it creates this kind of frustrating perception that you need to live life to its fullest when you're younger than 30, and then after that, shit sucks. And so the reason why this goes back to beer, burgers, and manual labor is, especially for men, there's kind of this perception that you go out and drink as much as you want, you eat as much meat and burgers and whatever as you want, and that is what men do. That is what manly men do. And, you know, that follows you. The habits you develop in your teens and in your 20s, those are generally the habits that you keep into your 20s and 30s, well, your 20s, your 30s, your 40s. You know, people are creatures of habit. It's hard to change unless you have an impetus to do so. I didn't become vegetarian until I effectively just was like, you know what, screw it, let's have an Impossible Burger. And admittedly, I'm not the most avid vegetarian. You know, if there's meat in a dish that I order from a restaurant, I'll pick the meat option sometimes if it sounds like it would be good. But I haven't bought meat from a grocery store in like forever. And so having that kind of impetus, you really do have to go out of your way, even if you know that, like, hey, yeah, maybe being vegetarian would be good for me, especially, you know, the older you get, the slower your metabolism is, the less time you have to exercise. The harder it is, you know, you exercise for a while and you feel like shit for the next 3 days, so you don't do it again. I need to do... yeah, I need to do more Ring Fit, honestly. But Shell's bringing up cardiovascular and other diseases, and the answer is, yeah, it's the older you get, the harder it is to kind of maintain a fitness regimen and a healthy lifestyle. When you're in your teens and your 20s and your 30s, you can kind of get away with a lot because your body is still kind of in that I'm growing, you can eat whatever you want, you can drink all night and not feel it, but as you get older, you slow down. You can't do that anymore, and it actually is quite destructive to be subjected to that kind of behavior. To subject yourself to that kind of thing. Ooh, we have a grandma upgrade. I should probably start getting some upgrades, but yeah, grandmas are twice as efficient, and shipments gain. Oh, but that's a lot of billions. Yeah, let's just mostly boost the grandmas for the time being. Because I know they make the wizard towers pretty good, too. Anywho, but so with beer burgers and manual labor, it becomes kind of this tradition for men to drink a lot and eat a lot of meat, both of which are actually quite bad for you and your health generally, but even like past a certain point in your life, like you really should be cutting back hard on those things because you just do not metabolize the alcohol nearly as well. And alcoholism is so much easier to fall into, especially if you don't have anything else going on in your life. Or, the older you get, the more you've kind of accumulated various coping mechanisms and things that might weigh you down. And so it's easier to fall into various vices, which are not great. But so, yeah, I've seen a number of my friends who are getting older saying, like, yeah, I can't go out drinking all night like I used to. It just destroys me. And I sympathize with that, and I also feel just kind of bad that there was even kind of the expectation that was the thing to do originally. But for whatever reason, our social media, our media in general lionizes these things as admirable. That you should be doing all of this, frankly, bad stuff. You see a movie or a TV show or whatever, and you see people at the club and they're having so much fun, or the advertisements. And it feels almost kind of like pyramid scheme logic that, and so much of this is that the societal trend and momentum to have, to have drinking be so socially acceptable, or smoking to be so socially acceptable. Oh, the cookie's lasting twice as long. That doesn't mean that they last on the screen twice as long. No, the bot lasts twice as long. Cripes, that's good. But, that if everybody stopped drinking as heavily as they do, especially, the binge drinker and the alcoholics, and if it truly just became kind of like a very occasional thing, and that becoming way drunk was not even, people look at it and it's like, ooh, I'm sorry you had to go through that. Because, growing up, you always kind of saw the people that are drunk and they're having fun, and, maybe they have the regrets and the consequences afterwards, but there's always kind of this feeling of like, yeah, but that's not going to be me. But then it is you. And you look back and you realize that, no, I have like a serious problem that needs to be addressed, but you're in the habit already. You're already fat. You're on the TV. You're 6 beers in and you're watching sports reruns. And, maybe you've had a burger for the day. I don't know. And that I think so much of our media and our perception of what it is to be manly is centered around so many of these things, without the recognition that, like, hey, this shit's actually not great for people. Nor is there kind of that perception of, like, hey, here's some alternatives that are not only acceptable, but better and, like, more fun. So I always had trouble growing up being around, I had trouble being around, some adults, especially, the more manly men kind of people, because I just cannot connect with them. There's no common ground between me and them. And maybe that's part of the reason why I'm so kind of anti that specific mentality and lifestyle and whatnot, is because I truly cannot find a connection between myself and that kind of lifestyle. And I'm related to a number of these people. I've got an uncle who watches sports, eats a lot of meat. I don't know if he drinks. I don't think he's much of a drinker. But he's a hunter. That's the other one. That he loves to hunt deer. He loves to hunt ducks. I don't know if he hunts anything else. He loves to go fishing, because that's also hunting. But those are his chosen vices. And so every time we go over to their place, that's what would be on the TV. And, maybe he wasn't watching it, but that it was always on. And so one day, I remember bringing up my cousin's Sega Genesis from the basement, because he had already gone off to college or something. And, the TV downstairs wasn't working for whatever reason, so I wanted to play Genesis upstairs while the relatives were just chatting. I was just a kid. And my uncle was very cross at the idea of me having the Sega Genesis connected to his TV and having the sports off because the sports had to be on. I realize I'm going back to this, but it was kind of this like odd realization that like I'm never going to connect to this man and his, you know, dozen of deer head trophies scattered around his house, the taxidermy ducks and guns everywhere, and it's just like I realize different culture, different preferences, different you know, different everything, but the more, like, the older I got, and the older, obviously, he got, and the more I go back, the less I'd even be able to talk to the man, because there's so little left in his life beyond just small farmland town drama, guns, hunting, and sports. Those are the only things. And it never seemed fun to me. He didn't seem happy. He just seemed kind of grumpy and angry, and so it feels like this is this weird perpetuated cycle where you present this lifestyle that can only be experienced by younger men. And this is the peak enjoyment of masculinity. You know, caring about other people, having interesting or creative hobbies. Those aren't for you. Those are for the girly men. Those are for the nerds. Those are for the girls. And you really ensconce yourself around these ideas of very traditional masculinity. It creates this odd system where everybody is just so focused on really just ages, I'm gonna say 13 to 30. And then everything beyond that is just kind of this, like, waiting period. Either you're waiting to become one of these sports people, or you're just waiting for the next opportunity to live vicariously through somebody else. And it bugs me. It bugs me that, you know, so much of our culture is based around these ideas. Because it leads to a lot of people just being weirdly shitty at each other. I've always had trouble, I think, connecting with a lot of male friends. Especially, you know, back before I started doing YouTube, and even during kind of the YouTube era, there are a number of friends that I've kind of had come and go because they I don't want to say, like, ascribe to a number of these things, but there was kind of that feeling of, like, emotions are weakness, feeling and caring are... Oh, hi? What are you? Trillion fingers. Multiplies the gain from 1,000 fingers by 20. Cool. How much does it get me? It's 3 million. 3.6 million per click. Pretty good. I'm not... It'd be actually really interesting if it would show me a secondary per second based on how fast, you know, how much click income I have. Because it's per second based on all of my structures, but that doesn't include my clicking. But so, recently, I mean, just kind of in general, I've often seen a lot of discourse back and forth over very social issues. COVID is an easy example, and yeah, maybe a bit of a dicey one, but there are a number of topics that I will just absolutely, I consider non-negotiable topics where if somebody wants to argue back against me on them, I'll more or less thinly veiled derisiveness. So for me, it's very much like healthcare. I mean, frankly, social justice in a lot of ways, gender equality, payments, billionaires, I don't know, so on and so forth. But it feels like I'm often arguing against the specter of this weirdly hyper-masculine sense of caring is a weakness, taking care of the world is a weakness, you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, take care of yourself, be a man's man, and so on and so forth. Like, those things are the admirable qualities that everybody's going for, and so it kind of legitimizes deriding other people's feelings and cares and opinions because, you know, they're not manly enough. And so, like, I remember specifically, I mean, multiple times over the course of my childhood and growing up and so on and so forth, where I would be upset about something. Let's go with an easy example. I had a friend who was a nerd. Very nerdy, loved gaming to some degree, really loved computer programming, software engineering, so on and so forth. Also loved his cars, also loved drinking, some other things. I would call him an alpha nerd. He wasn't actually an alpha nerd, he wanted to be one. But I was part of a frat house for nerds in college, and there were aspects of it that were really, really cool, but there were a lot of aspects of it that were very, very tied to masculine ideals in a way that I think was actually very unhealthy for almost all of these people. You had this kind of enforced social hierarchy based on being assholes to each other that only half the group, or like half the people in the organization, really ascribed to. But the problem is they were the ones that were kind of the power-hungry assholes that would go for the positions of power and perpetuate the cycle and kind of set the tone for the culture of the organization. And so you could find most people were actually quite amenable and nice and kind in, on a one-on-one basis. But the moment that there was some kind of perception of the rest of the group observing you, you started acting more masculine. Or if it was kind of an interpersonal issue where two people needed to actually like come to terms with something. And so in this case, this guy he wanted to be like a top dog nerd, but he didn't really have enough social clout to really get there. So the best he could do is latch himself onto other people and kind of borrow their clout to make it his own. And, that's not necessarily I don't want to deride a person for, placing themselves in that position, but it often would lead to them almost flexing their faux social status harder because it made them feel like it was real. And I think that was not necessarily healthy for anybody. But so I was starting to kind of pull away from this guy very specifically, just because I think in general he was becoming less and less of a friend and maybe a little bit more self-absorbed. I was his next door neighbor and he really liked to watch TV shows at 4 a.m. when I'm, trying to sleep, and because I have an 8 a.m. class, and so suddenly you just hear the Colbert Report's theme song playing through the wall, subwoofer maybe a foot away from my head. That was misery. And so, slowly I stopped being friendly with this guy. Because it was infuriating to be around him and subjected to that. And it was very difficult to convince him that, like, hey, this shit isn't cool. And, like, he knew it wasn't cool, but the emotional impact of, like, actually caring about me when it went against his, I'm not going to say his preferences, but, like, he could not handle the disconnect between what I wanted and what he wanted, or what I needed and what he wanted, really. I needed sleep, but he wanted to watch. And so there was that disconnect, and so I started pulling away from that, because truly, like, how can you be friends with a person that's going to torture you by waking you up every single night at 4 a.m. because he started watching a television show? I probably should have gone to the RA at some point, but in the end, I just ended up moving away. But what sealed the deal on our friendship ending was because I was trying to convince him to care about me. So prior to going to college, I was in a really bad head-on collision that nearly totaled my car. And, like, I only just remember bits and pieces of it. I was fine, but I was incredibly shooken up because, like, boy, if I had gotten hit different, I probably would have been seriously injured. But instead it just spun my car out and, wrecked the entire front half. But had I been a little faster, it would have hit me right in the driver's side door. But that left me very jittery in cars. And very unhappy when somebody was speeding, swerving, starting and stopping really fast, just screwing around in cars, because truly, like, I don't want to go through that again. It sucked. It was not fun, and whenever I'm in a car with anybody else, I'm actually quite nervous, with the exception of Shell, because I'm very used to her, and she drives very safely. But so for this guy, he was speeding and texting in traffic. Well, like, tailgating people and swerving in and out. Like, it was just this awful mixture. And this is like within days of him, because I didn't have a car, so often, you know, many of the people in this group would shuttle people without cars to various events. And so we'd gone to some event or another, and I was in his car because he was one of my close friends that, you know, had a car. So I was like, yeah, I'll be in your car for this one. We'll hang out, listen to music on the way there, chat, so on and so forth. Pretty wholesome and whatnot. Problem is, there was a little bit of snow, and so he decided he was going to do donuts. And you know what? If everybody in the car wants to do donuts, still don't do donuts because they're not good for your car and kind of illegal. But if you're in a safe place, big parking lot, nothing else around, and you're willing to potentially damage your car over it, yeah, it's probably okay, maybe. But Shell and I were in the car. I think Shell was in the car with me. But, like, I at the very least was not okay with donuts, and he was, you know, I tried to be very clear about this, like, hey, I'm not okay with this. Wow. Did that granny bonus just, like, absolutely turbo boost the amount I was making, or was I not paying attention? I'll have to look at that in a second, because I think I just made a shit ton of cookies and I have no idea. I have not been paying attention to the math. But in the aftermath of these incidents, you know, where he's texting and driving and swerving and doing donuts against my wishes, with me being in the car with no way of getting out of that, knowing that, you know, I had this somewhat lasting trauma of being behind a car, his response was, get over it. I don't care. I have no interest in how you feel about this. And some amount of this is just the fact that the dude probably was kind of sociopathic. And, you know, you can't get away with that. You can't get around that. But that I feel like our society has kind of built itself around, at least for men, not caring about other men's feelings. You know, that it's okay to be shitty at your friends because they're your friends and they'll just have to deal with it. It's okay to be dismissive towards women. They're just being hysterical. It's okay to not care about weaker men because they are weaker than you, therefore beneath your attention and not worth caring about. And I find that has resulted in, I would argue, a tremendous amount of... Oh, right. It was at the 600 because I had the times 7 thing going on. That's where the math disconnect came from. I was not paying attention. Gosh, it's still better to go for the shipments, honestly. We're getting to the point where it'd be worth probably investing in wizard towers again. But I'm going to try and get that up to 25, I think. Getting that buff would probably be pretty good. What else do we even have? Grandpa-operated science lab and leisure club. Grandmas are 4 times as efficient. Regularly unlocks new upgrades. Requires a quadrillion. Oh, gosh. How far does this game go? Probably, like, freaking forever. I'll try and also get factories up to max, so they're only worth, like, 1%. I'll actually say the cursors are worth a bafflingly large amount for some reason. They were 10%, actually. Huh. Impressive. Though, frankly, most of my money is coming out of wizard towers and shipments and nothing more. That's fine. But I think my whole life, I've been kind of on the receiving end of this exact same interaction, but with a multitude of different people. You know, trying to get... generally men, not always, but generally men, and maybe it's just people in general, to care about my thoughts and feelings. And I think it's frustrating going up against that because there's such a high culture of, F your feelings. I don't care about you. If you care about this, then you're weak and pathetic and worth my derision. And it's frustrating because it feels like the world would be a lot better if, so many more of these people were a little bit more caring and considerate. Not only to, not only for people like me that want to be at least somewhat more considered, but even the people around them. For so many of these people that I grew up with that acted like this, it never felt like they were happy, just vicious. The kind of vicious humor where you make a joke at someone's expense and everybody laughs. And maybe a couple of them actually think it's funny, but most of them have kind of dead eyes and just look like they're enjoying it because that's what they're supposed to. This is kind of a mixed bag, but it always felt like so many of the people that enjoyed adversarial humor, for example, weren't doing it because it was actually funny, but they were doing it because they didn't know anything better, and it made them feel superior, and therefore it was worth doing. But almost nobody I've ever met that regularly engages in punching down, just for the sake of their own amusement, they usually just end up being sad, angry people. Not exactly in the same vein, but, every once in a while you'll see somebody talking about some kind of, like, really positive social change. So, for example, I saw a game that I'm a big fan of at the moment has Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, has a very overt lesbian relationship, and apparently, one of the two is actually a trans woman. And I had no idea, but apparently a number of people, let's see, a number of people leaving reviews for the game did know, and were actually, should I actually start investing in these at this point? Yeah, Wizard Tower should be a third of the price of shipments. Temples, on the other hand, aren't really worth much of anything. Maybe I should go factories, though. Let's get that up to 100%. Even if they're worth nothing, I want the achievement. Then I'll probably sell them. Oh. My cursors are boosting my clicks per second. Say I should probably invest in some cursors, but I just don't have enough. But yeah, I don't know. It's just frustrating. Okay, right. I was talking Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. But yeah, there was just a bunch of men that were generally men. I'm sure maybe some of them were women, but many of them were screaming about how this is just woke culture and awful and was ruining their experience. And I wonder about so many of these things. All of these people have this kind of smug feeling of the way the world should be, but it never feels like they're happy about it. That they've put themselves in this weird, unhappy loop where they'll only be happy if everything conforms to their kind of backwards 1950s image of what life should be. But if they were actually put in that position, they'd probably be equally mad about something else that, to some degree, they've logicked themselves into a corner of not being happy about anything. And the only way that they do derive that level of happiness is by winning. And whatever that winning is just kind of this ephemeral thing. And so it's less about long-term enjoyment of life, but more about those 15 years of beer, burgers, hard labor, and sports. And then everything else is just kind of waiting for the next hit. Whatever it is. I don't know, I've kind of looped back on myself, and I'm sure I sound like I've made some grand point here, but I think I'm mostly just angry at the world in my own way, and wishing it could be better. And I feel like the easiest route to that is always just, like, getting people to care about each other more. But that's really difficult, especially when it comes to stuff like the internet, or just society in general. The world's just too damn big, and the internet's too damn big, and trying to enforce empathy on people is just kind of a fool's venture. The best you can hope for is, maybe that the behaviors that make it socially acceptable to be an asshole to others constantly, to deride other people for their feelings or caring or you know, progress, that we can slowly deplatform those ideas and those people, their proponents, until, you know, the rest of us can have a better world to be in, maybe. I don't know. It's weird. I ramble. At some point, I'd like to sit down and probably do, like, a much more... I'm not gonna say, like, rigidly designed essay on this. Because I think this is the kind of thing that I'd rather just leave as one cookie cast. Where I just kind of ramble about why this specific thing bothers me. But just to finish off, I usually don't have any kind of, like, life lessons. But I think one of the most important things is, if you're watching this video and you kind of think about yourself and it's like, yeah, do I have any of these traits that might be problematic? The easiest way to do it, to get around it, is just to, like, look at your surroundings and say, okay, what can I do to make this better? Like, actually better. Not just better for me, but better for the people around me, the society around me, the community that I'm in. What could improve this for everybody? You know, is one of my friends feeling down? Is something wrong with them? Have I asked, you know, my best friend or my romantic partner or just some random acquaintance, you know, how their day's going, if there's anything wrong with them? Just talk about and open up a little bit more. I feel like the world would be a better place if people did that in general. And so hopefully, you know, some of you might think about this and say, like, yeah, I haven't actually talked to this friend in a while. Let's see how they're doing. Let's see how they're actually doing and listen. Because I think listening is very important about it. As part of all of this, too. Sorry, it's like 2 in the morning. I'm starting to ramble. But I think with all that said, I've said all that I can say. I could talk about this a lot, and I probably will. I think a lot of things are rooted in this kind of weird, aggressive, uncaring, I disregard your feelings mentality. And so we'll probably refer back to this not infrequently for some of the social issues that I'll probably talk about in the Cookie Cast. But I think I've said what I need to say, at least for now. So, with that, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you guys on the next episode of the Cookie Cast. Have a good night.